Hello and welcome to Starcast. This is Heather Rowan Robbins. I'm speaking to you from Ronan, Montana, and I'm joined by Moon. And this is a fascinating part of astrology. Now, I've known Moon for over a decade, working with her in St. Paul, Minnesota. She began studying astrology in 1970 as she had a profound spiritual experience that inspired her to go into this. She completed a training program through CCRS in Los Angeles and has been a full-time astrologer ever since. Over the decades, astrology taught her that what happens in the heavens mirrors what we experience here on Earth, and that we're far more connected to the universe than we imagine. Because of that, when her identical twin was diagnosed with ovarian cancer in 2005 and died 5 months later, she found the answer in studying the charts. One of the things that brought her a deep level of acceptance was studying her twin's death chart. It showed her clearly the reasons for leaving, why it happened then, and her soul's journey forward without her. For those last 11 years, she's worked with many grieving people using astrology to help them find peace, understanding, and clarity through their loss. And this is such a unique perspective. I don't know anybody else. Worked with death charts, but you've done it in depth. Tell me more about, first of all, say hello and introduce yourself. And then I'd love to hear more about how you entered into this study.
Yes. Well, thank you, Heather, for having me here. So I'm Moon Zlotnick, and my business is Astrology by Moon Rabbit. How I got my name is a whole other story we're not going into today. But I have been a professional astrologer for almost 5 decades now. And like probably so many astrologers, I interpreted birth charts, forecast charts, comparison charts, and never did I really ever imagine that I would be called to work with the subject of healing through a death chart. But because, as Heather said, I lost my twin, and there was so much more depth that helped me find understanding and healing than even the grief therapist or other ways of healing, I decided I had to really undergo an intense study of this and bring it forward into the astrological community. So I don't know that there was, other than kind of this organic process of losing somebody and then going on to study it, which I think many, many people who are astrologers will have the opportunity, in their lives or someone they know, to look at the date, time, and place that somebody died and make sense of it. But I've just completed it and am in the process of publishing a book called Death Charts, an astrological tool for the bereaved. And so my point of view is that this is something that can help people who are grieving.
That's fascinating. What did you see in your own understanding of the death chart with your sister? I know that's tender information.
Well, there's so many things. I don't think I put it in a slide, Heather.
Okay.
Yeah,
We'll go back. But first tell us a little bit about.
So so I was with her, and she had what I would consider a very good death. She was at home. She'd been on home hospice. She was surrounded by people who loved her, who were telling her to go to the light and, that she would be remembered and all of this. So I was able to look at the clock when her heart stopped beating. And that chart, there was an exact, almost to the minute conjunction with the Sun and Saturn opposing Chiron. And I think she died of starvation more than ovarian cancer because she couldn't eat. And I just feel like Saturn is so symbolic of karmic endings, and Chiron is so symbolic of healing wounds. And the opposition was that death kind of healed her. I don't know if you've ever been in an experience with anybody, but My twin was a psychotherapist who became a psychoanalyst, and she was really, really good at giving, but terrible at receiving. And it wasn't until she got sick, she talked to me about, I can finally let in all the love in my life. It was something that really changed her in her life, that became more whole as she went through the death process. So that's just one of the pieces of symbolism that I talk about in the book.
I've noticed in charts that especially during long-term illnesses that I often see a Jupiter transit for the person. And I see sadness in the charts of the people who love them and freedom for that person, because that was your twin. You are also experiencing that transit. How
Yes.
many minutes difference were your births?
23, so pretty
Very
different.
close, yeah.
But
But
Jupiter was rising in that chart. It was 10 degrees off the ascendant in the 12th house.
that's beautiful. Now starting with your beautiful presentation here.
So the
Would you like to?
first thing that I wanted to do was, primarily in my work with clients, I look for the path to healing, which is in putting the death chart as a transit chart around the natal chart of the client. But I wanted just to give you an example of how the death chart itself tells a story. And so I picked this because it was somebody that I had a lot of information about in terms of the actual death itself. So it was somebody who was a student of mine for about 8 years, and we stayed very involved through her illness. I was not present at her death. But one of the things that I look at, because so often we don't have a time of death, or we have an approximate time of death. So I do look at the ascendant, as the last breath, and the sun is the person's vitality. But I look very much at the patterns, like this has a very big T-square. And often the pattern, which isn't dependent on having a time of birth, will kind of tell the story of what's happening. So when we look at this death chart, we see that Pluto in the 7th house in early Aquarius is the focal planet of a T-square with the nodes, and then up in the 10th, the sun and Jupiter. And Vesta's up there as well. So it's a pretty, I would consider it a very loaded T-square.
Yeah.
We know that the nodes bring with them a kind of karmic flavor. And as you said, there's Jupiter, Heather, on the sun. So we have the symbolism of, I think, somebody who's kind of ready to go,
A freedom.
And they're heading towards their north node. So they're going in a very spiritual way.
That's beautiful. And so for the audience, this is an event chart.
Yes.
And if we wanted to compare the chart of this to the natal chart, we would see the transits of the death chart. But this is the moment itself, the event chart. And you can tell so much by an event chart. And this is the event of their transition. And I see that the person was 84, which is such a year of, am I in or am I out?
Yes.
My father died at 84. The
big
Pope
year in
died
this
at 84.
Yeah.
And it's often a fairly, to the point death. It's not drawn out. It doesn't mean it's overnight necessarily, but he died after 2 months of hospice, not 3 years of hospice. It's kind of succinct. But people that make it past that, there are many. That doesn't mean everybody dies then. That just means there's sort of a check-in point. And a lot depends upon the Uranus in the natal chart. And is it, where it's kind of, are we checking in for another round, or is this, I think of it more like an easy exit year.
Yes.
So tell me more what you see here.
So, my client died of brain cancer, and did look up that Aries rules the brain, and we see Chiron in Aries at the very top of the chart. And it's in a square to that Mars on the ascendant that's rising.
Mm-hmm.
And so Mars is squaring Chiron, and there's a kind of, I think of it as an echo of the illness and the death chart.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
so the situation was she had a very, very big family, and her kids and her grandkids, and I think there might have been, in-laws there. They were all present. And again, it was a situation of just, being loving and encouraging and telling her to go to the light, which I believe is part of that Sun, Jupiter, and even the Vesta can be a kind of devotional energy. The planets in the 10th and 11th house to me represent kind of this big grouping of people or community surrounding her. And I did a reading a couple months ago of a young person who died of cerebral palsy at age 29. And almost the entire chart was in her fourth house. And she had 30 relatives present at her death. And the chart really will reflect the energy of the moment. So the Cancer rising I associate with the family. And you see up in the 11th house that Venus and the Moon are conjunct. And that gives us the impression that she was feeling the love, that there was love around her, and that her moon, the ascendant is ruled by the moon, and that it's conjunct Venus. There was a lot of peacefulness there. If you look up at the very top of the chart, you see the midheaven conjunct Neptune. And I feel like Neptune creates a situation where the veil is very thin and it's easy to pass over to the other side. And so I was in touch with the family members who described the death as very spiritual and very easy, which, having Mars on the ascendant, you might think, oh, no, that's hard, but it really wasn't. And I think because the ruler of the ascendant was conjunct Venus, that added to the peacefulness of it.
Beautiful. That's a powerful piece. And let's take a look at the next one. What would you like to say here, or should we go on to the next chart?
No. So what I'm choosing to do today is to share some case studies or some examples
Very
from
helpful.
my practice. And so there's always a story, and then there's a chart. And this is how I approach it. So
Thank you.
This is for a client, and she was with her partner for 10 years. And he had a problem with alcohol. So she realized that she couldn't tolerate him drinking in their shared home. So she said no drinking, and he complied for a while, but then he started using again. And so she came home one night and he was drunk, and they had a huge fight. She told him to leave. He drove to his parents' house, and the next morning his dad found him. And these situations are particularly traumatic because, of course, she felt like, oh, I made it happen, which we know she didn't. But that's why I'm using it as an example, because the chart speaks very clearly to basically dissuade her from carrying that blame and guilt. So there's a 3-part phenomena, I guess, or a package that I use when I'm looking at death charts. And there's always something in the person's natal chart that I think of has the suggestion. It doesn't mean when you look at a birth chart that you're going to be able to predict a person's death or losses, but there is a suggestion of the kinds of experiences that a person might have. And I learned that from studying my own chart, of course. Now, so in the client's natal chart, the sun is...
So B was the one that died, and B's partner.
No, so now we're starting with the client on the inside.
Okay, inside, and then, okay, got it.
On the outside. So if you look in the first house of the natal chart, you see a sun in Leo conjunct Saturn. And then in the fourth house, they square Juno. And Juno is an asteroid that often represents the spouse. And a Sun Saturn person is somebody who kind of deals with the harsh reality of life, including possibly experiencing loss. So that's kind of the theme in the natal chart. If you look in the death chart, in the fourth house, Saturn is conjunct. So
Is that the next one?
Mars is conjunct. This is on the outer wheel.
Okay.
This is the only way I have it.
Okay.
So we have to look in the fourth house where you see the ascendant at 2 Scorpio conjunct Mars. And then Saturn is there. And they are, okay. So the Mars ascendant, this is an approximate time.
Right. But that Mars on the ascendant in Scorpio is really strong.
Yes.
And Mars is in its own sign for the populace, which could make it stronger, which has some good points and some bad points. And it sounds like his temper was
right. And Mars
his
can
real
be
issues.
kind of rash and impulsive.
And it's a tight trine to his Neptune.
Well, and then his Neptune is, opposite the sun in the death chart. So the sun is in the second house in Virgo, and it's a 3-degree opposition to Neptune and Chiron. And so to me, that suggested that alcohol was involved with his death, and that it came out of his own internal wounding, and that his partner, that it wasn't her issue, it was clearly his issue.
Yeah.
So I've been working a lot with eclipses as kind of a major, like there has never been. So I'm clocking somewhere around 170 or 180 death chart readings now. And there has not been a single one where there wasn't a really significant solar eclipse.
Interesting.
And sometimes lunar eclipses, but I'm focusing more on the solar eclipse. So this death was August 27th of 2012. And the eclipse that was the most prominent, or the one that I researched the most, happened in December. And I want to say a word about solar eclipses, because even though they have a date that they happen, they can be active 6 months to a year before and 6 months to a year after the actual eclipse.
It's like energy on that point that radiates out. That's how I.
Yes, somebody once said to me that, like, the eclipse point, like the 21 Scorpio, it's like an electrical transmitter. And every time a transiting planet is applying to that degree or is separating from that degree, boom, you get some kind of a discharge of energy. And somebody, I'm going to digress just for a second, but somebody was following, we had a solar eclipse at 28 Aquarius, which is right on the descendant of Trump's chart, opposing his Mars. And the alleged attempted shooting, there was another eclipse trigger. So it's been really interesting to kind of watch this happen in public figures' lives, right? Anyway, for this client, that 21 degrees Scorpio was right on her natal Juno at 16 Scorpio. So it kind of set off that natal pattern with loss, Saturn, and Juno spots. Okay. And then always, along with the eclipses, there are planetary, outer planet transits. So we have Saturn transiting Saturn in the fourth house, going over the North Node and Ceres. We have transiting Uranus up in the ninth house, squaring the client's Venus, Moon in the 12th house. And that is a really clear indication of an unexpected, sudden separation from someone she loves. And the moon, natal moon for the client, opposes Pluto. So that Uranus is setting off another natal indication of potential loss of a loved one. And then Pluto isn't that far away from, it's a close opposition to the moon Venus and transiting Pluto. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, all right. So we see there the kind of indications of a loss in her life. And in the book, I talk a little bit about what I call the path forward for the client. It focuses on these outer planetary transits and their potential for transformation. So often, if there's a Uranus transit, the client at some point feels much more independent. They feel like a sense of freedom. They often will feel like there were ways in which the relationship or something about the situation was inhibiting their authenticity. And so this doesn't happen, of course, overnight. It happens over time. But we take these outer planetary transits and look at them as this potential for personal growth or personal transformation, which really astrologers do using transits all the time. So it isn't that different than what we might use otherwise.
Yep. And that seems to be very powerful. Here, I'm going to put this and tell us more about this story coming in.
Okay. So
I'll be right there. And
okay.
you go ahead.
Yes. Okay. So this is pretty tragic. A lot of these are very tragic. So this was a woman who came to see me. She was pretty young. I think she wasn't 30 yet. And her dad died when she was 16, and then her mom died 2 years later. And we'll see when we look at her chart that premature adulthood, I believe, is related to the planet Saturn. So before these losses happened, when she was in elementary school, her parents divorced. And she lived with her mom for the first 14 years of her life until her mom remarried. And at that point, she really decided she would prefer to live with her dad, who she'd been seeing, but he was still single, and they developed this very, very close relationship. The big bond that they shared was they loved food and they loved cooking. And so they would shop and do meal planning and make dinner together. And she said, as she, did this kind of side by side dinner every night with her father, that she just felt so connected to him and spiritually connected. And when she came in for the reading, she really felt like her dad was her primary person. So they only had 2 years together, and her dad went outside to mow the lawn, and he sat down on a lawn chair. And when he didn't come in after a while, she found him out there. So the coroner estimated the cause of death as heart failure, and the time of death at 6 p.m. So now we have to wait to go on to the next slide for Heather to get back. So I'll just say a few words about this work. It's very, very important when you're doing work with people who are grieving to understand and do as much personal healing around your own losses as possible. Okay. I'm just talking to fill the time. So
minor plumbing issues here. Sorry about that. So and we are going back on to this
yes.
This chart.
Okay. So this young person and her dad. So you'll see that the inner wheel, that is a very, very difficult chart. So she's born with a Sun Chiron conjunction, and that is opposite Saturn and square the moon. So Right. This is an out of sign. The moon makes a T-square
So
to
that's her natal chart and his death chart
death
on the
chart.
outside?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So her natal chart has uh, a Ceres moon opposition. You know, Ceres seems to have a lot to do with custodial issues and situations of
And
divorce.
custody battles.
Right. And so you missed the story, but she lived with her mom till she was 14, and then she moved in with her dad. And but they divorced when she was really young, and you could kind of see that early family disruption in that moon out of sign square to Saturn, out of sign square to Chiron. And that talks about kind of the disruption in the family. Okay. So if you look at the death chart as a standalone chart, so that's the outer wheel, in the death chart, the moon down in the third house is conjunct Neptune and opposing Venus and Saturn. Okay. And so I have to back up a little bit. So there are certain things that have appeared over and over when I do death charts. And very simplistically, the sun is often the physical situation, the illness, the body situation. The moon
Interesting.
is more the emotional situation. So kind of more the feelings that are happening. Venus will represent the loved ones. Mercury will represent the communication that's happening or not happening around the death. So in this particular death chart, when you have Venus, the loved ones, next to Saturn, opposing this moon Neptune, you know, there's this feeling that he was kind of, I talk about it, I use this case example in the book, that he was kind of feeling brokenhearted that his marriage didn't work out. He died 2 years after the divorce. No, that's wrong. No, that's wrong. No, right. His wife remarried 2 years earlier. So I think he was still feeling brokenhearted. Yeah. So, so that I think of as kind of where the story is that, you know, he died alone with the Venus Saturn conjunction. And I feel like he was just so overwhelmed with the moon Neptune that he just passed very quickly.
And that moon Neptune suggests like he was well received, that there was kind of spiritual accompaniment on the other side.
Yes, I totally agree with that.
And I noticed that tight trine from Pluto to his moon, you know.
Yes, the death moon, yes, right,
Yeah.
which also makes it easy to kind of let go.
Yeah.
So he died in July of 2007, and the active eclipse happened in September. And that eclipse happened at 18 Virgo, which if you look in the outer wheel.
And that's 2007?
Yep, 2007.
Yeah.
It squares the midheaven and the nadir.
I remember that on my ascendant. Yeah.
And then if you look down at the transiting Uranus, Uranus was at 18 Pisces. So that was a particularly kind of Uranian eclipse. So we get that, the echoes of things that happen unexpectedly. And often Uranus will have a role with cardiovascular disease.
And do we know his cause of death, did you say?
The coroner said he had a heart attack.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that Venus-Saturn conjunction in Leo.
Yes.
Right in his heart.
It also resonates to that, doesn't it?
Yeah. So, and the next story?
I wanted to talk about a couple of transits in that chart, just a little bit.
Okay, let's go back. Sorry, go ahead. Yes, please.
So, so the ascendant, and this was another, you know, the coroner approximated it. Sometimes they're pretty close. So we have Sagittarius rising, which is ruled by Jupiter. And so we look at Jupiter in the transit chart. Wait. ruler of the ascendant. Oh, his natal, okay, client. The client's natal ascendant is Sagittarius. Actually, the ascendant of the death chart is also 1 degree Sagittarius. But her Jupiter up in the ninth house is being transited by that Saturn. And I think, so she was 16 years old when her dad died. And I think when you're that young, that Saturn going over Jupiter, you just lose faith in everything. She has a very full ninth house. And being somebody who believed in something was very important to her. And we talked about this. She felt very just deeply, deeply disillusioned about, believing this spiritual connection and that it could be ended that quickly, and that he was her person. Okay. So let's now move on. Okay.
I have one question going back to that. Sorry.
Yes.
And you said you use these transits to help people find a way out. How did you
Yes.
use the transits to talk about for her? She had felt like she had lost her person and
Yes.
lost faith.
Well, so I actually focused a lot on the Saturn transit in the ninth house. And I asked her if there was anything that she really wanted to study. Now, she wasn't 16 when we talked, she was in her 20s, right? And as a result of our conversation, she went back and got a degree in nursing so she could help people help people with their health. And so that wasn't kind of the clear intention, but that was a suggestion that I made that she came back and told me was really, really helpful.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you for asking. Okay. So this is a brother and a sister, and the sister was my client. And, when siblings are born really close together, they feel like really connected, and they were really connected. They came from a long line of people who struggled with addiction, but Jay, my client, was active in AA and had been sober for a dozen years, but her brother was still struggling. So she got a call one morning in 2005 that her brother had been in a fatal car accident. And she knew, because they were in contact all the time, that he'd been clean. He had just gotten a new job, and he had applied with the medical insurance to enter an outpatient addiction treatment program. He was living with his girlfriend, and they had a teenage daughter together. So it seemed like he was doing really, really well. And she was very surprised. And the police told his mother that he had crashed his car a block away from where he lived, and that he had both alcohol and cocaine in his system. So my client went to his apartment, to get some things, and found this letter where his insurance had denied him treatment. And she felt like that might have been a trigger for him to kind of lean into his addiction. So
the center, your client is the sister or the brother or the mother?
Oh, it's a brother and sister, and my client is a sister.
Okay.
Okay.
And so the outside transits are her brother's death.
Death, yes. Okay. You got it. So in my client's natal chart, you'll see that the Sun and Saturn are conjunct in the third house, and they square Neptune, which I think is kind of one of those indications of the family issues with addiction. But what I focus on is, if you look in the third house of brothers and sisters, there is Chiron sitting there conjunct Jupiter, which opposes Pluto in the ninth house. So there is the natal kind of resonance to woundedness around a sibling and some kind of unexpected loss or death.
Third house has to do with neighborhood, early education, and siblings,
right,
and arms and communication. Right.
Okay. In the death chart,
and again, we see this is the second chart we've seen strong. Your last client with the Leo had it was at Sun Saturn.
Yes.
The people who take responsibility, and so they feel like they are responsible for everybody around them, even when it's not their responsibility.
Yeah.
And that can really echo off a client with a family member who has an addiction issues. And it can be a tough kind of holding your boundaries. What am I responsible for, and what aren't you? But go ahead on this.
Okay. So in the death chart, if you look up in the ninth house, you see the sun and then opposing Uranus in the third house. So, third house has to do with short journeys. The sun has to do with the person's vitality and consciousness. But it was kind of like it was a surprise to him, too. And the moon, where is the moon? This is transiting moon is also is also square Uranus from the third house. So I think there's a real kind of indication in the death chart of this being an accident and being a surprise. And
it's Uranus in her third house, right on her Chiron, right opposed to Uranus, right opposed the sun of the day. Yeah, that was an accident. That was a surprise.
And
an
this
impulsive
was another case where the natal resonance of having some kind of wounding in a sibling relationship was activated by a transit. And the eclipse.
And that Mercury in Leo was directly opposed Neptune at the time of death.
Yes.
Right on her Saturn. And that Mercury Neptune, if you are prone to relapses, it's usually a time to curl up with a good book.
Well, I think of
you
it
need time
as
out of gritty reality for a minute.
Distorted thinking or unclear thinking or deceptive thinking. So yes, that was there too. So this eclipse, so the death was in August and the eclipse the following October was at 10 degrees Libra, squaring the client's moon up there in the 8th house. So, that eclipses that activate the 8th house also, they don't always speak to loss, but they can sometimes speak to loss. And then Pluto was in an applying conjunction to her Venus, which often you will see in the charts of people who are going through
a
loss that really deeply changes their lives, which this did. So one of the outcomes for this client, let me see, transiting Neptune. So, Neptune. So if you look in the third house, transiting Neptune was conjunct that Sun Saturn. And what she did is she started really doing a lot of research into the addiction in her family, going back a couple generations, and it made her even more committed to her 12-step program. It really impacted her in this way that she could see the genetic markers, and she was more determined than ever not to kind of go down that road for herself.
Beautiful. She's got a tight trine, I see, between Jupiter and Neptune in her natal chart. And I've noticed that Jupiter-Neptune aspect, they say 80% of alcoholics are hypoglycemic. And if you can deal with the blood sugar issues, and I've noticed that the Jupiter-Neptune can make us prone to blood sugar issues, not that they're not necessarily diabetes, but just the more they can level off that blood sugar, the easier their moods are, and the less likely alcohol can be like a sudden dose of sugar to the system, creates a high, which creates a drop, which creates the craving. And if you can level that off, it's helpful. And it also comes with strong intuition and other wonderful things. But yeah. So that's powerful. That's powerful. And how did you help her? So she went into nursing as an approach past that. Is that correct?
That was the previous client.
Okay, I'm sorry. How did you help her?
Went into her family ancestry.
That's right.
Got more committed to her spirituality, which I aligned with the Neptune.
Positive Neptune.
Conjunction, yes.
Right. We say with Neptune aspects, it's either spirit or spirits. That if you,
I haven't heard that. That's good.
Either you honor spirit, that's a need for Neptune, and you can with connection, with spirituality, with intuition, or it becomes sometimes a craving for escapism. But why AA and so many other forms of treating addictions call in, the connection with spirit of your choice, but
Mm.
that we need that Neptune somehow. So that's beautiful that she took that in a positive way. Are you ready for the next chart?
Yes. Okay. So this is another daughter, and she lost her dad. And she and her mom, I think it was in the hospital, but they were there with him.
Mm-hmm.
And he stopped breathing suddenly. I can't remember what the illness was. And the client is B, and her mom, who was a nurse, said he's gone. And she had this experience that she felt. She was holding her dad's hand, and she felt all this energy passing from her father's hand into her own. And she was sure that he was sending her a message. She didn't really understand what the message was until 10 days later. She had 3 kids, so she was home alone. That matters. I think when you have 3, they were young kids. And when her mom walked in, she heard a ringing in her ears. And she said it was like a million spirits speaking to her all at once. And it gave her this feeling that her dad was apologizing to her for not being emotionally present. And she said that began her spiritual awakening. So here's a death that within the death itself begins a spiritual awakening for the client. So she stopped drinking, and she went on to really, really improve her life. So in her natal chart, you look at Venus in the first house, and I say Venus is everybody in our lives that we love. And you see it's in an opposition to Pluto, Saturn, Pluto. And so she has...
Fear of loss is a lifelong issue.
Yes. And I do think that people who are born with that Saturn-Pluto conjunction have a very kind of rich underworld in their lives. A kind of, they have a little bit more kind of longing for the invisible parts of life. Okay.
Well put. That echoed by the Sun and Mercury in the 12th, too.
Yes. So in the death chart, Venus and Pluto are up at the top of the chart in the 10th house in a very, very close conjunction opposite the moon. And so that's where there's kind of the resonance with the death. So the dad died in January of 2021, and there was an eclipse in December, a month before, 2020, at 23 degrees Sagittarius, which is, I have conjunct, but it's actually opposing the client's moon, and possibly with an aspect to that node. So often eclipses aspecting the moon will have to do with some kind of a change in the family, which this did. So Pluto by transit was its natal position. I'll just carry on here. So Pluto, you see up at the top of the chart in the death chart, which is a transit chart, that Saturn and Pluto are widely conjunct. So Saturn is in Aquarius and Pluto's in late Capricorn. But she has an out of sign Saturn-Pluto conjunction in her birth chart, where Pluto is in an air sign and Saturn is in a water sign. And at the time she lost her dad, Saturn was in an air sign and Pluto was in an earth sign. But anyway, that's not that. I'm sorry, that's not important. But they're making a square. So often when you're born with a Saturn-Pluto conjunction, and there's a year where there's another Saturn-Pluto conjunction, it's a year that holds great potential to change your life. Okay. Now, she said that her dad's death kind of opened her up to a spiritual experience of sorts. And I attribute that to Chiron having passed over her son and getting so close to her ascendant. So Chiron, I think, is at 5 Aries and her sun is at 0. And this healing that she got from her dad, we know Chiron has the capacity to heal things. And there it is in her 12th house of spirituality or connection to things otherworldly.
That's beautiful.
Do you see anything in this chart you want to comment on?
I'm just watching the, that the Venus-Pluto conjunctions was very close to square her natal Saturn-Pluto
And that's what we
conjunction.
talked about when you were in the other
Right.
room.
And I'm thinking that, with that combination in her 7th house, this may need to have been, she partnered with this death process with her dad, that she and her dad had a deep karmic interaction. And often it's hard to really partner yourself with a parental planet in the 7th until you finish some karmic cycle with them. And so in some ways it feels like she had room for herself in this next chapter of her life that she might not have had before. So beautiful.
Okay.
Ready for the next one?
I think, yeah, let's go. I'm not
We have
sure.
one more. So we're just going to closing up.
Yes, we are closing up.
Tell me about your book. And again, when's it coming out?
August. I don't have an exact date yet, but August of 2026. So just a few months in the future. And it's a book that, first of all, kind of goes through and is information about grief and loss and healing through loss. And then there's a section on if you're a practicing professional astrologer, how to frame, begin, carry on, and close a death chart session. And then there's a delineation. There's delineations of the eclipses through the signs and houses, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and Chiron through the signs and houses. And then there are 14 case studies at the end.
Beautiful.
That go into great detail with the story of the loss and the accompanying chart interpretations.
That's lovely. I like what you said about bringing up how to close that chart, because when we open a chart, when we go into a chart, we're creating a psychic milieu. We're opening ourselves to that soul whose chart we're looking into. And when you're looking at a tough event or a death chart, that's very present in the room with you.
Yes.
So how do you suggest closing that in a way that feels clean and doesn't leave the crypt door open?
Well, I think for the client, it has to do with something to look forward to, something where it might be like there's a positive side to your Neptune transit, and this is how you can lean into it.
Right.
But I also write about, for the astrologer, how important it is to have, after the session is over, to have a clearing ritual for yourself.
Yeah.
So for me, a lot of times I just wash my hands. It's like that simple. It used to be a lot more involved. But I think everybody who does this kind of work, you can't absorb other people's grief or you won't be able to do it.
Right.
And so finding a way to create a clear ending for yourself is important.
I agree. I imagine handing them over to their spiritual support and then go wash my hands. But yes, that it's we need that break. Doubling pain in the world does not help. No. You're here to reduce the total suffering and increase the total joy. So thank you so much, Moon, for showing up and for handling things while the Rotary man came and left. And that for everybody else, I'm going to do another piece later on today about a 15-minute piece on the astrology of the month ahead. I've just been honored to have this time with Moon Rabbit and really enjoyed it.
Yes, it's always deeply heartfelt for me to talk about this line of my work. And I want to say one other thing, that the book I hope creates a beginning to open up astrologers to think about how we can use astrology to bring healing to people who are grieving.
I agree. That's beautiful. May it be so,
May it be
because
so.
people don't reach out to us often when they are in a painful place. And one of the things you showed in so many of the charts that you brought up is it does not further to take on responsibility for other people and their grief, or guilt can be a way that we stay attached. I noticed
Yes.
when my father died, I went over everything, and guilt was still attachment, it was still connection.
Yeah.
And to kind of letting that go and holding on to the memories and the joy and the experience and the
Mhm.
understanding as a better legacy than the guilt. But that's
Amen.
all those layers
Amen. I
here.
couldn't agree more.
Wonderful.
All right. Thank you so
So take
much.
care.
You too.